So now you know how to properly set up when the other team is serving. Let's review what happens after we defend the serve and send the ball back to the other side of the court. This is called defensive transitioning. After we execute a good bump set hit, or maybe we just got to pass the ball over the net without a hit, anytime we send the ball to the other side of the net, our team has to transition to their defensive spots on the floor. So let's review this. The front row starts off pretty easy. The first thing they do is get up on the net with their arms raised in the air, getting ready to block. The setter goes home. And no, I don't mean she packs up her bags and actually goes home. That is what we call the spot the setter defends. That spot, the setter's home, is always the same, regardless of where she may have started on the volley. The location is right around here, a little bit behind the 10-foot line, sort of in between the middle blocker and right blocker. The back row defenders set up pretty similar to how they do in a serve receive. The two of them have to cover the entire back court. So this is what we should look like after we send the ball over the net. Now, depending on what the other team does affects how our defense will respond. That means we do not just stay in this same position for the entire sequence. This is just where everyone goes to start with. The other team will do typically one of four things, and depending on which of those four things they do will determine how our defense needs to adjust. The other team will either manage a good bump set hit attack in our direction, or they will just pass the ball over the net without actually managing a hit. If they do manage a hit, the hit will come from one of three different areas. It will either come from the left, from the middle, or from the right. The other option is like we just said, they don't get a hit and they just pass it over. Let's review what we should do if they are just going to pass it over, since that is the easiest thing to defend against. As soon as we realize they are not going to manage a hit and they are just going to pass it our way, everyone should yell out, "Free ball!" This lets everyone know that they are not hitting, and everyone can move into, guess what? The serve-receive position. You heard me right. If we are getting a free ball, everyone moves into the same position we were in as if we were defending against a serve. That means the setter is no longer staying at home to defend, so they move up into their normal setting spot, and everyone else goes into their normal serve-receive position. That's the easy part. Now, let's reset our defense and talk about what happens if they hit the ball over from either the left, middle, or right part of the net. First and foremost, if we realize they are going to manage a hit in our direction, the players in the front row need to be thinking to themselves, block, 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 because that is what we want to always try and do. However, depending on where the hit is coming from will affect who tries to block and who drops back to defend in case we don't block. The middle blocker has the easier job. Why? Because they are going to try and block everything. The blocker on the left will only try and block a hit coming from the left part of the court, and the blocker on the right will only try and block a hit coming from the right part of the court. So it will look something like this. A hit coming from the left would mean the middle blocker shifts over next to the blocker on their left, and they both jump and try to block. A hit coming from the right would mean the middle blocker shifts over next to the blocker on their right, and they both jump and try to block. A hit coming from the middle would mean only the middle blocker is jumping trying to block. So the question is, if you're the left or right blocker and you're not blocking, what do? You back up off the net a few feet, not too far, and try to defend what we call the tip balls. Those are the dinky little balls that barely make it over the net. This will also help to defend when the blockers only partially block a hit. Often those balls will fall into the same area. The two defenders in the back row will shift slightly either left or right, depending on where the hit is coming from. The main thing is for the back row players to be aware of the large open areas around them. Those are our weak spots, and the other team is going to try and hit the ball in those areas. The setter, who will be at home, is also going to shift slightly from left to right, still staying at home, depending on where the hit is coming from. The important thing for the setter to know is this. They, as the setter, are only trying to defend against the first touch. This means, If the ball comes over and they are not going to get the first touch, then they immediately leave home and move to their normal setting position. This will happen more often than not, but it's important for them to stay home until they see they aren't going to defend that first touch. If they do defend the first touch, which means the hit comes over and goes near them, they need to pass it high in the air and announce loudly, "Setter's out," to let everyone know the setter is not able to set the ball now. Now, regardless of who gets that ball, once we defend it and get the first touch up in the air, we are no longer on defense. We are now trying to attack by generating a bump set hit. So once the first ball is in the air, the three hitters on the front row, who are close to the net getting ready to block earlier, should be backing up off the net close to the 10-foot line, getting ready in case the setter passes them the ball for a hit. Once we send the ball over the net, either by executing a good hit with some mustard on it, or maybe we could only just pass it over, thus giving the other team a free ball, we have to remember it's time to transition to defense. So anytime we send the ball over the net towards the other team, everyone should transition back to the defensive position we reviewed earlier. All three front row players are on the net with their arms raised, looking for the block. The setter has gone home, and the back row players are defending the backcourt. You know you're transitioning properly when you're constantly in motion. There should never be a time when the ball is in play when you're just standing around watching. You should either be getting into position to defend or getting into position to attack. The longer a volley goes, meaning the more the ball goes back and forth over the net, the more transitioning there is. That's why understanding this system is so important, because if you don't transition properly, that will lead to you being out of position, which makes it much easier for the other team to score a point. This is just like riding a bike. Once you tried that for the first time, it probably felt uncomfortable and awkward. But by sticking with it and constantly riding the bike and constantly practicing, you're now at the point where you can do it without even thinking. This transitioning is something we'll be working on at every practice, so we, as a team, can execute it without even having to think about it.